If you want to change federal law in Washington, D.C. today, the person holding the keys to your success isn't a 60-year-old power broker puffing a cigar in a mahogany-paneled steakhouse.
No, not at all.
Right. It is a 24-year-old kid, maybe 2 years out of college, standing in a cramped Capitol Hill hallway, juggling like 12 different national crises at once. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. I am your host, and today we have a very specific mission for you. We are pulling back the curtain on how everyday citizens can actually influence massive federal policy.
And I am your expert for today. We're basically taking the mythology of DC lobbying and replacing it with the actual mechanics of how laws are shaped. It's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. And to do this, we're building today's deep dive from an incredible insider stack of materials. We've got video seminars, training slide decks, and highly detailed policy fact sheets, all produced by the League of American Bicyclists.
Yeah, and these sources were specifically designed to prepare citizen advocates for the 2026 National Bike Summit in Washington, D.C.
Which makes this particular stack of sources incredibly valuable for anyone listening. What you are getting here isn't some theoretical political science lecture.
Right.
It is a literal step-by-step playbook for effective citizen lobbying. This stuff has been battlefield tested by people trying to secure billions in funding.
Billions. Yeah, it's huge.
So whether you are passionate about getting a safer crosswalk in your own neighborhood, or you're intensely curious about the actual psychology of politics, or you just want to know how the sausage gets made, this is for you.
Okay, let's unpack this Capitol Hill power dynamic, because the reality of that 24-year-old staffer completely changes how we should view D.C.
It really does. Because when citizens march up to Capitol Hill for these advocacy days, they almost never meet with the elected senator or representative. I mean, at least not for the complex, nitty-gritty policy discussions. They meet with congressional staffers. And the training materials make a huge point to emphasize that these offices are frequently run by staffers in their early or mid-20s. Wait, I have to pause here. Someone who just took their college finals 2 years ago is advising a U.S. senator on national transportation infrastructure. That sounds, well, terrifying.
I know, it sounds alarming from the outside, but it is the lifeblood of the Hill. The turnover is high, the hours are absolutely brutal, and the sheer volume of information is staggering.
Wow.
Yeah, these young staffers hold immense gatekeeping power over legislation. They're the ones actually reading the 400-page briefs. They advise the boss on exactly how to vote, and they decide which constituent concerns make it to the member's desk.
And the workload they carry is just absurd. Like, one of the sources, a congressional staffer named Joe Teslant, he works for Representative Jamie Raskin. He notes that he personally handles 11 or 12 different issue areas at any given time.
That's a lot of hats to wear.
It is. We are talking everything from transportation and infrastructure to defense energy and foreign trade. And during busy seasons, he's taking 25 to 30 advocacy meetings a week.
I mean, think about the brain fog that sets in when you are context switching 12 times a day.
Okay. And that is exactly why the dynamic between professional lobbyists and regular constituents is so totally different. Joe points out in the materials that when he takes a meeting with a professional K Street lobbyist, his guard immediately goes up.
Naturally.
Right. He is actively wondering, how are they trying to spin me? What are they hiding in this data?
That makes total sense. I mean, think of Capitol Hill as a massive skeptical filter designed to block out professional noise. But if you are a constituent, your local zip code acts as the ultimate VIP bypass key.
That's a great way to put it.
It cuts right to the skepticism because you aren't selling anything. You actually live with the consequences of the policies. It's the difference between a salesman trying to hit a quota and a neighbor trying to fix a pothole.
Precisely. A professional lobbyist brings abstract national statistics. A constituent brings a visceral, real story about the dangerous blind corner intersection right next to the local middle school in the representative's home district. It grounds the policy in reality.
But using that VIP key requires you to play by strict, almost unwritten rules of engagement.
Oh, absolutely. The logistics are intense. The training emphasizes gathering your advocacy team outside the office 5 to 10 minutes early. You have to create a mandatory group text to make sure no one is left behind in the maze of the Senate buildings.
I've been in those buildings. They're a maze.
They are. And you dress in business formal. In fact, the sources explicitly tell these bicycle advocates not to wear their bike gear to the Hill.
Wait, so no neon spandex?
No neon spandex, which is a crucial psychological tactic. The staffers already know you represent biking. It's on the calendar. You show up in a suit to prove you belong in a serious federal policy discussion.
Right, and there's a cardinal rule of the Hill. Never, ever stand up a congressional office. If you're delayed at security, you call. Standing them up tells that overworked 24-year-old that you do not respect their time.
And it burns the credibility of your entire movement because you don't orchestrate all of this for a single meeting. You're trying to establish a long-term relationship.
Now, because you only have the attention of that overworked staffer for exactly 20 minutes, you can't just walk in and wing it. You have to build a highly engineered pitch.
Yeah, the sources detail the architecture of these meetings with absolute military precision. Teams are advised to assign very specific roles before they even step foot in the building.
What kind of roles?
So you have a moderator who keeps time. You have an ask maker who delivers the specific policy request. You have a note taker. And then you have the appreciator.
The appreciator.
Yeah, their entire job is to thank the office for a specific positive past action. What's fascinating here is the psychology behind that appreciator role. It isn't just about being polite.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I have to ask, doesn't that come off as incredibly condescending or rehearsed to the staffer?
Yeah.
If I'm a staffer and a group walks in and suddenly the designated appreciator starts praising me, I feel like I'd roll my eyes.
You'd think so, but remember the chaotic environment we just described. These staffers spend 90% of their day fielding phone calls from angry people. It is a relentlessly negative job.
That's fair.
So when a group walks in and their dedicated role is to say, hey, we noticed your boss voted for the infrastructure package last month, and we want to sincerely thank you for securing that, it completely disarms the room.
Wow. Okay.
It proves you did your homework, you tracked their boss's voting record, and you aren't just there to yell at them.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It establishes a baseline of mutual respect. But you still have to keep that 20-minute window aggressively on track. The materials warn that if a staffer goes quiet, or worse, if someone in your own coalition starts rambling off topic about their personal political grievances.
Oh, that happens a lot.
I bet. The moderator has to instantly intervene and bring it right back to the policy.
And here's a pro tip from the training. If the staffer asks you a highly technical question about highway funding that you don't know the answer to, you never guess.
Never guess.
Never. You simply say, I don't know, let me get back to you. Which, strategically, is a massive advantage.
How so? Isn't it bad to look uninformed?
Not at all, because admitting you don't know gives you a guaranteed, legitimate excuse to email that office later in the week with the answer. It keeps the dialogue open and proves you follow through.
That is brilliant. It's a built-in follow-up. Now, when it comes to framing the actual issue, the strategy gets really nuanced. What's brilliant about this playbook is how politically agnostic it is.
Right.
As an advocate, your personal politics simply do not matter in that room. The source material shows that if you are sitting in a Democratic office, you pitch the bicycle infrastructure in terms of carbon reduction and greenhouse gases.
Exactly.
And if you walk next door into a Republican office, you pitch that exact same bike lane as a tool for reducing traffic congestion and promoting individual freedom of movement. It is pure pragmatic code switching. Now, just to be totally clear to you, the listener, we are not endorsing either of those political viewpoints.
Right. We're just impartially reporting the tactical advice from the sources here. It is the definition of knowing your audience. But what's truly fascinating is that the sources highlight an ultimate trump card. Yeah, no matter the political party, framing your policy around economic benefits, reduced healthcare costs, and direct local district impact almost always wins.
That makes sense. Money talks.
Always. Rohan, a lobbyist from the American Heart Association featured in the materials, talks about framing walking and biking infrastructure as preventative public health infrastructure. If a safe sidewalk prevents a pedestrian strike, that indirectly reduces massive emergency healthcare costs. That logic resonates with everyone, regardless of their political affiliation.
But what if you deliver this perfectly tailored, highly pragmatic pitch, and the staffer just gives you a blank stare? I'll admit, if there was an uncomfortable silence in the room after I made my point, I would start panicking and just babble to fill the void.
It's a natural human instinct to fill dead air, but the training specifically advises against it. They teach the tactical use of silence. If you ask a concluding question and the staffer is quiet, let a full 20-second pause sit there.
20 seconds in a quiet room feels like an absolute eternity.
It does. It really does. But you don't deploy that tactical silence just to win a staring contest. You use it to force the staffer to engage. It forces them to formulate an actual answer or commit to a position rather than letting you nervously talk yourself right out of the office.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you don't orchestrate a perfectly timed meeting and deploy that silence just to say hello.
Yeah.
You use it to force an answer on a highly specific policy ask. For these 2026 advocates, that ask revolves around a boring-sounding bureaucratic acronym that is actually a matter of life and death.
Yep. The primary focus is the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TA.
Right, TAP. TP is an incredibly unique federal mechanism. The sources emphasize that it is the only formula transportation program designed specifically for local governments. But wait, before we go further, we need to clarify this. What is the actual difference between a formula program and a regular federal grant?
That is a critical distinction to make. A competitive federal grant means your town has to hire a professional grant writer to basically beg Washington for cash.
Right.
And you are basically hoping you win the lottery against 1,000 other cities. A formula program, on the other hand, means the money is mathematically guaranteed to flow to local governments based on rigid data like population and need. You don't have to fight for it. If you meet the criteria, the money is yours.
That is a massive difference. And that guaranteed money is exactly why local communities are desperate for TAP. They use it to build sidewalks, bike lanes, and safe routes to elementary schools. But it gets a tiny sliver of the pie.
A very tiny sliver.
Just 2% of federal highway funding. Because it is the only dedicated local fund, it is wildly oversubscribed. We're talking $4 requested by local governments for every single dollar Washington actually awards.
Which brings us to the bureaucratic threat. There is recurring talk in Washington of combining TAP with other, much larger federal transportation programs just to, quote-unquote, streamline the paperwork.
And the sources show exactly why that is a terrible idea for local towns.
Yeah.
Think of it like rolling your specific weekly grocery budget into your general housing and utilities budget.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Suddenly, the money gets completely absorbed by the bigger bills, like a new roof, or in the government's case, a massive highway interchange project, and you're left looking at an empty fridge. The local communities lose their dedicated funding.
That analogy perfectly captures the danger, and the experts in the source material warn that this isn't just some theoretical fear. The last time Congress combined programs to create TA back in 2012, rolling together transportation enhancements, safe routes to school, and recreational trails into one pot, overall funding for those local initiatives plummeted by 30% almost overnight.
30%. That is devastating for local infrastructure.
It was, and it took advocates nearly a decade of grinding work to get that dedicated funding back to its original levels. So their primary ask in these meetings is very clear. Do not combine TAP. Protect the formula.
Got it. Now, their second major ask is passing something called the Sarah Debink Langenkamp Active Transportation Safety Act. Now, this gets into the bureaucratic weeds a bit, but it solves a massive bottleneck. Under normal federal rules, if a rural or small community wins federal safety money, they still have to come up with a 20% local match.
Which is an insurmountable financial hurdle for many small municipalities.
Exactly. Imagine the federal government offers to buy your town a state-of-the-art $1 million road safety system. The catch: your tiny rural town of 5,000 people has to hand Washington $200,000 in cash by Friday to unlock it.
It's impossible.
For a small town, that free money is functionally impossible to access. They just don't have the tax base.
And that is where the Langenkamp Act comes in. It provides a critical workaround. It allows those smaller communities to use funds from a different pot, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, to cover that daunting 20% local match.
That's clever.
It is. It effectively unlocks vital safety projects that would otherwise die on the vine simply because a small town couldn't scrape together the entry fee.
And we need to be crystal clear. These aren't just aesthetic improvements. We aren't talking about making a town look prettier. We're talking about concrete infrastructure that saves lives.
Absolutely.
The sources lay out the Federal Highway Administration data, and it is staggering. Adding sidewalks reduces neighborhood crashes by an incredible 65 to 89%. Adding a shoulder on a rural road reduces pedestrian crashes by 71%. And adding protected bike lanes reduces total crashes by up to 49%.
This raises an important question, though. Why do those specific structures work so well? It isn't just about putting paint on the ground. It is about human psychology.
Right. The materials explain the mechanism behind this. When you build a wide open road, You are subconsciously telling a driver that they have a huge margin of error.
Which makes them feel comfortable speeding.
Exactly. But when you add a bike lane or widen a sidewalk, you narrow the optical width of the road. It subconsciously forces drivers to slow down and pay closer attention. It physically reduces the conflict points where cars and people cross paths.
It engineers safety directly into the environment. But, to truly understand the urgency of these policy asks why these citizens are traveling to D.C. in 2026 to fight for this, we have to look at the macro data. We've discussed the how of the meetings and the what of the policies, but the why is driven by a grim statistical reality.
Yeah, the numbers in the source material genuinely gave me chills. If you look at traffic fatalities over the last couple of decades, there's been a massive deadly shift. In 1997, people outside of vehicles, meaning pedestrians and cyclists, accounted for 20% of total traffic fatalities.
Okay.
By 2023, that number had skyrocketed to 37%.
It is a horrifying trend line. Between 2001 and 2021, fatalities of these vulnerable road users, or VRUs, increased at twice the rate of all other road users. It became such a localized crisis that Congress finally had to step in with a heavy-handed mandate called the VRU Special Rule.
And the VRU special rule is fascinating because it forces the issue. It states that if a state's vulnerable road user fatalities hit 15% or more of its total roadway fatalities, that state must spend at least 15% of its federal highway safety improvement program dollars specifically on VRU safety.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a classic example of federal leverage being used to correct a systemic local failure.
How so?
Well, to understand why this mandate was necessary, look at what was happening before. Despite vulnerable road users making up 20 to 30% of the deaths, states were spending a mere 4 to 5% of their safety funds to protect them.
Wow.
Some states were spending less than 1%. They were completely ignoring the problem to fund bigger highway projects.
So let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Does forcing a state to spend a specific percentage actually fix the underlying safety problem? Or is it just more Washington red tape that state transportation departments figure out how to bypass?
It's a fair question, but the data in our sources suggests it absolutely fixed the funding problem. Since the VRU special rule went into effect, HSIP spending on vulnerable road users' safety has increased by a staggering 50% nationwide.
50%, that's massive.
It really is. And the states that qualify, which are marked clearly on the threat maps provided to the advocates, have easily met the obligation. They had the projects ready to go. They just needed the federal mandate to force their own transportation departments to finally allocate the money.
So if you are listening to this right now and you've ever wondered why your specific city suddenly doled 3 protected bike lanes out of nowhere last year, this right here is the answer. It wasn't an accident. It was the VRU special rule kicking in, forcing your state to actually spend the money on keeping you safe. And now, the advocates are marching on Capitol Hill to make sure this special rule is protected in the upcoming 2026 reauthorization bill.
Which brings us full circle. The reason those protected bike lanes got built in your town is because, years ago, a well-prepared group of citizens sat in a cramped D.C. hallway, waited for their 20-minute window with a 24-year-old staffer, and asked for it, using the exact framework we just discussed.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We started with the granular logistics of Capitol Hill, making sure your group text is working, leaving the spandex at home, and navigating the skepticism of young, overworked staffers.
Right.
And we've walked all the way through the architecture of the pitch to understand how massive billion-dollar federal funding mechanisms like the TAP formula and the Langenkamp Act are protected by those exact hallway interactions.
It is a powerful reminder for you as the listener. The true currency in Washington, D.C. isn't necessarily massive campaign checks or shadowy backroom deals.
No.
Very often, the most powerful currency is the highly organized, localized, and polite persistence of constituents who show up knowing exactly what they're asking for and exactly how the mechanisms of government work.
It's that local zip code bypassing the cynical filter.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If a coordinated push by everyday bicycle advocates can fundamentally alter driver psychology, unlock millions in local matching funds, and protect federal safety mandates using the hyper-organized tactics we just discussed, what entirely different overlooked issue in your own community is just waiting for a well-prepared group of citizens to walk through a congressional door? Because the reality is the power to change the law isn't held by the guy in the pinstripe suit. It's held by the constituents sitting in the hallway waiting to speak.
Virtual's me.